And we are live. In any minute, I'm just making sure everything's up and working. And audio seems good. I think everything's good. Welcome, everybody. This is my final stream of the year. Yes, I do have a baby. He is a little over a month old. Absolutely wonderful. And I do thank you all for joining in. In this, what we're going to be doing is going over some of the big things this year that's happened. I'm just going to pull this up for a background. Some of the big things that's happened within the Linux community. There's been a lot of different Linux distributions have been released. There's been a lot of desktop environments, a lot of drama around GNOME, things like that. And my personal favorite, there has been a lot of hardware stuff announced and released due to Linux. And in this, what we are going to be doing is talking about all of those, at least the things that were most important to me. And then near the end, what I'm going to do is communicate a little bit with you guys on what y'all think is the most important things that has happened this year within Linux. And we don't have to just limit it to Linux. There's some non-Linux related items that I will be covering, as this technically is a general technology channel with a heavy focus and preference to free and open source software. First, some coffee. There we go. All right, so we are going to go ahead and start on. Oh, he has a new child. No. Okay. With that, let's go ahead and switch to our desktop. We are first going to be covering some... I have a little bookmark thing. I was going to add a lot more, but as I mentioned in the... as I mentioned earlier... There we go. As I mentioned earlier, I had to do some things with my child, which is more than fine. Okay, I'm going to position this properly here so you guys can get a good view of exactly what is going on. There's low latency, which is good, so I'm able to do this based on what you guys are thinking. Thank you, Alexandru, for the super chat. You are magnificent. What are we doing? We are going to be checking out some things, and the first thing that we're going to be checking out is, in my opinion, probably my favorite thing, and that is the release of GNOME 40. This happened this year. GNOME 40 was a big change compared to GNOME 3.38. Keep up the great job. Happy New Year. Yeah, Happy New Year to everybody. Hopefully 2022 is as eventful as 2021, at least in regards to Linux stuff. It's been a good year. So, GNOME 40 dropped. A lot of things changed with GNOME 40. The primary and most obvious thing was the horizontal workspaces. A lot of people did not like that. Me personally, I did. I was somebody who used KDE moderately religiously until the drop of GNOME 40, and it was actually a me challenging myself, kind of. I thought I would end up not liking it to use Fedora, the new release of Fedora that shipped with GNOME 40, and I did that for a month. And that experience of me using GNOME 40 and Fedora for that month ended up me switching to GNOME on a full-time basis. This right here is my primary desktop, and this is obviously running GNOME 40. This is on Endeavor OS, and one thing is I have it riddled with extensions, so there's pros and cons. With the release of GNOME 40, quickly, some of the things that changed: the weather app was redesigned. They have a beautiful weather application. The settings have improved, and with the workspaces, you can do like dynamic and set workspaces. You can input source switching on the keyboard. Browse better. The web application that nobody actually uses had some updates. The software changes. If you watch Switch to Linux, I recommend you watch his video on GNOME 40. He gets a little bothered over the, I think it's GNOME 41. He gets a little bothered over the categories, which it's a wonderful video. File enhancements, and there's been a lot more. But a lot of people disagree with me. I love GNOME 40. But there are two distributions that are going to be getting away from GNOME 40. One of them is Pop! OS. They've been kind of doing this with their extensions, but if you've used GNOME, you know every time there is a new version, extensions break. That's just what's going to happen, especially with GNOME 40 because they changed so many things. It broke a heck of a lot of extensions. And because of this, Pop! OS, their Cosmic Desktop environment, heavily relies on using GNOME extensions, and going from 3.38 to 40 probably gave them a whole heck of a lot of work. So what they are going to be doing is rewriting their own, or writing their own desktop environment based on Rust, or written in Rust. This announcement is just the general Cosmic announcement, which was also released this year. And it's really good, at least the base of it is. They added the dock on the bottom, which extends across the screen. Obviously, a lot of the stuff is customizable. And Pop! OS overall had a lot of good updates this year. A lot with their extensions. They switched up how the application works. And very recently, if you watched the video that I did on that, they added the new run prompt. Well, not run prompt, the new application menu, which is a very well-designed application launcher that I believe it's Windows key A, but you can key bind everything basically how you would like it to be. Sorry, I talk a lot. I got to catch my breath a little bit. Yeah, so they're going to be ditching the GNOME base for their Cosmic Desktop. It's codenamed Cosmic. And I think it was on a Reddit post that one of the desktop developers for System 76 confirmed that they are going to be completely rebuilding their own in Rust. And that came off of somebody asking if they're going to do a KDE spin. Another organization that is going to be going further away from GNOME is Budgie. And they're going to be switching this out for the using the Enlightenment project as the base for the Budgie desktop environment. If you've never used Budgie, I'd recommend it. It is a very clean. One of the main things with it is no gracias. One of the main things with it is you don't really want to customize it because they've done so good just making a really easy to use modern desktop environment. I love the little slide out. I used it for a little bit. I did a series of videos, well, a video where I switched to the Solus distribution, which is a fantastic Linux distribution. And I used Bungie for about 2 weeks, had a great time. I switched, I think, to their KDE spin. I'm not 100% sure. And it wasn't as great, but yeah. They're going to be switching to Enlightenment. So these two projects, the Enlightenment with Budgie, as well as the Pop! OS Cosmic desktop environment, these are going to be some absolutely fascinating projects to be watching over the span of the next couple years, and especially 2022 going forward. So I'm going to catch up on chat. I just talked quite a bit. OpenBox is great. Dynamic Window Manager. Don't try GNOME on the Raspberry Pi. Yeah, I agree. I put one other thing that happened this year is Pop! OS released their very own Raspberry Pi image. Well, I think it was the 21.10 release, if I'm remembering correctly. And I tried the beta on the Raspberry Pi, and it looked pretty, but it had a lot of issues, especially with the DPI and the scaling for the display, and it was a little sluggish. But it's a Raspberry Pi. I mean, the best use for Raspberry Pis ultimately is using like server applications, like IPv4 cameras, hosting maybe like a Pi-hole for ad blocking. Those are generally the best use cases for Raspberry Pis. So moving forward, we're going to be talking about some Linux distribution releases. Zorin 16 was released. This was a magnificent release, one that I covered extensively. I think I did 3 different videos on Zorin OS 16 in this different stages of development, from trying out the very first beta, trying out the Pro version, and then finally the official release announcement, which this is one of the Linux distributions that I have no problem recommending to somebody who's completely new to Linux. If I was going to install a Linux distribution on somebody's computer that had absolutely no experience with Linux, I would probably put Zorin OS 16, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One, it's incredibly easy to customize if you have no experience with customization. They have the really nice layout switcher. I know there's other distributions that do have layout switchers and it's really easy, but in addition to that, this comes with some tools that is very handy. One of them is if you open up a Windows exe file, one, it's going to try to redirect you to a Linux native application, which is awesome. And if you don't want to do that, it will attempt to allow you to install it using Wine and all that, but it really tries to push you towards something that's not installing something with Wine. So this is a wonderful release. Quickly looking through these release notes here. So I'm going to scroll up, trying to pay attention to that chat. Welcome, Pizza Loving Nerd. Pizza Loving Nerd did a fantastic rewind video. So after this stream, I'm going to probably post it in the comments. So watch out for that. It's pretty funny. So looking at some of these Zorin release notes, you can see overall it's beautiful and you could change between light and dark. They have a beautiful mountainous dynamic wallpaper, good login screen. They have that Getting Starting tour, which will help you if you have no idea what you're doing. Good gestures, but that was kind of a given with GNOME because it is running a GNOME base. And the App Store is really easy because it uses FlatHub and it imports those automatically. We're going to be talking about Elementary OS in a second, so they do things a little bit differently. And you can see right here, you could change the source. Most people won't know, or a lot of people who are new might not know the differences between these sources. One, it might encourage them to search it up, which that would be cool, but by default, it automatically selects what is probably your best bet. And usually when it comes to installing Linux applications, your best bet is Flatpak. If we go down, slide load Windows App Software, this is what we just talked about, where you can install it or install with app support. So this example is Zoom. So you can install Zoom, and this will go ahead and redirect you to the actual Linux version instead of trying to install this exe. Sound recorder app, a couple other things. Overall, this was one of my favorite distribution releases, but my favorite isn't important. What is important is something of importance. And that would probably be the Debian 11 Bullseye release that happened this year. The thing with Debian is they do not release distributions very often. I think it's every 2 years or so. And the reason why Debian releases is moderately a big deal is because there are a ton of Linux distributions that base themselves or build off of the Debian branch. One of them, and probably the most obvious, is Ubuntu. And then when Ubuntu uses the Debian 11 backend repositories and all that, all the other Linux distributions that are based on Ubuntu, which is a wide variety of them, including Zorin OS, which we just talked about. We have Dominique in here. Flutter OS uses the Ubuntu base. When Debian updates, it causes a pretty good chain of events. Other than the fact that when Debian usually updates, it's still about a year behind when it comes to version numbers and things like that. It's not like Debian 11 dropped and it gave you GNOME 41. We can see that on August 14th, when Debian dropped, it gave you the updated version of GNOME 38 or 3.38. So it's still behind, but this right here is very important whenever Debian sees any updates, because they also have some changes, some software updates, and different things they do. And they changed the background too, which is cool. Ubuntu bad. Ubuntu is not inherently bad. Ubuntu is they say Ubuntu base bad. The Ubuntu base is pretty good. And I do like snap packages on Ubuntu servers, but I don't really install them very much on my computer. I don't really have it in my notes, but if I go to Linux Mint, This was another Linux distribution that received a couple of different updates. Let's install instructions. Where's the release announcement? Linux Mint was updated a couple different times this year, and lots of really nice changes. I think this year they added the applets on the screen and a couple other stuff. Linux Mint is my personal favorite Ubuntu base, other than Zorin, that you could go ahead and try out today. Now, with that, we had Elementary OS release. Now, Elementary OS is very popular. It's not at all my favorite. Coffee break. It's not my favorite. There's a lot of things that I think they could do differently. Elementary OS kind of gives me like the Macintosh from like 2012 vibes when it comes to the appearance and how everything is laid out. It's not my favorite thing in the world, but it received a lot of updates that did fix some of the things that I was inherently didn't like, and one of them is the theming. They greatly improved the dark theming with the Odin 6 release. They had a 6.1 release very recently, which fixed other things, but definitely the Odin 6 release was probably the most important. If we go through here, you can choose your look. They did improve the appearance settings, and you can see that here, how their dark mode looks. Sandbox and portals, is this? Yeah, applications. So they changed a lot of how you can set up permissions with various applications. You have more control over that. App Center plus Flatpak. They boasted they're adding Flatpak to their App Center, but with that, it was kind of weird because you have to it's not there already, and initially it didn't even tell you anything. You have to go to FlatHub and install an application first for it to pull those repositories. In the newest 6.1 version, they kind of fixed that by at least adding a little note in the search results of their applications that tells you that's something you need to do. Why they just don't include the FlatHub repository in their App Center by default really doesn't make sense to me, especially the fact that they already force their preferred applications on top of the search results anyway, and they add warnings when you try to install anything that's not natively in their app stores, which is a very weird way to go about things. Other than that, there's been some visual improvements. You can see some of the things going on here. They added some applications. I think just like Zorin, they added a pretty nice, I think it's a sound recorder. They do have beautiful apps, and with the 6.1 release or around that time frame, you can install all of the Elementary OS applications via flat packages, or if you would like to. So that is an option for you. But see, it doesn't look very good to me. And you can change some of the theming, but it's not as easy to do as something like just regular GNOME, or if you use KDE Plasma especially. KDE Plasma is very customizable. But yeah, I wasn't too impressed with this. It is nice that you can pick this. With GNOME, I have to have like an extension to be able to switch between the audio inputs here. I mean, it is pretty, but there's been a lot of things that has improved, but I still don't think it's there yet. With that, we are going to jump down to some non-Linux distribution things, and one of them is Flutter. Ubuntu is starting to use Flutter in a lot of their code, and most notably, they are switching up their installer to Flutter. We covered this, I think, 2 times. Once when they first kind of teased it and like 2 of the menus worked, up until recently with one of their beta releases included the new Ubuntu installer that's written in Flutter. And I mean, it's cool visually, but it doesn't really add too much to it. But it is interesting, and I'm pretty sure Flutter is a Google project. So if I Flutter code and Flutter dev, I'm fairly certain it's a Google project. See, on your Google settings. So Ubuntu is teaming up with Google and the open source Flutter project going forward. So that's going to be interesting to see how that proceeds. I'm going to check out chat real quick, see what you guys are saying. What distro do you recommend the most for programming purposes? All Linux distributions are generally going to be good for programming. I like Arch, or not Arch specifically, Endeavor OS. Fedora is good. You can't really pick a Linux distribution that's good for this purpose, that purpose. It's just what works best with your workflow. And the most important thing for that is the desktop environment. Ultimately, what are you going to be the most efficient in? And that's what I would say. And yeah, Fedora is great for programming. And one reason for that is, like, if you use Debian and try to use it for programming, you're going to have to work around some things to get like the most updated version of Python, the most updated version of Java, things like that. With something like Fedora, it's not as rolling as an Arch update structure, but it is going to have a lot of the latest and greatest based packages that you're going to need to be able to code efficiently. Yeah, so Flutter, it's a Google project. All these other organizations are teaming up with Flutter, which it's interesting, like ByteDance, this is TikTok, Capital One, Alibaba, some interesting partnerships with this. With that, we're going to move on to how a university got itself banned from the Linux kernel. This was not a good thing. The University of Minnesota was completely banned university-wide from being able to contribute code to the Linux kernel. And that mostly stems from them running kind of sketchy experiments, trying to add, where did it go? They added like bugs, they added, they added malicious code, and just as like for experimental purposes to try to show how vulnerable it can be if there's a bad actor, when like it's a university. Like you went through everything to get trusted enough to have that kind of access, and then you add all that, add bad code, and you got yourself banned. Whoops. That was a bad idea. And yeah, it was very stupid what they did. Generally, the Linux Foundation is going to trust universities to have good intent. And apparently the University of Minnesota did not have good intent. So that was silly of them to do. Moving on, non-Linux type stuff. We had the release of Windows 11. Now, Windows 11 essentially is like, I almost said it's a KDE inspired Linux distribution. It seems that way because the next thing we're going to cover is the what is it, WSL? Yeah, the Windows Linux subsystem. But Windows 11 was released. I like it personally better than 10 just because of the visuals. But like any Linux like any Windows operating system, there's going to be some crap you don't like. And like right here, this laptop that I have in my hand, this is running Windows at the moment, and I kept Windows on it because I'm going to review the laptop and I need to use the software and the extra things that are included on it to be able to give a proper review. And it is completely, it's really weird using it because you legit get like pop-ups within the operating system asking you to like switch to Bing, to extend your a lot of this stuff is ASUS crap, but to add McAfee antivirus and all this crap. And like even within, they're not showing it here on this introducing Windows announcement, of course, but a lot of these icons are actually ads when you click on it and it installs the application because it's not already on your system. And we talked about that and looked at that in the actual video that I covered this. But yeah, just like Dominic says, it's just Windows 10, but with a new theme and a little bit more bloatware added to it. And like the main thing that bothered me was you can't write. I know there's a hotkey for it, but like if you right click things, you don't get as much settings. A lot of the theming is weird. Like they just now, like it's incomplete. They just now added a dark theme to Notepad, and a lot of the other applications that are Linux or Windows-based applications haven't been updated to match the new theming at all. So overall, it's really something else. But it is pretty, and you haven't, or unless if you're on an AMD system, there hasn't been a significant performance drop while using this. Next up, the WSL. This is just the Ubuntu page and kind of the installation guide on how to use it. But essentially, you can run Linux GUI and Linux native applications within Windows with this. So that's kind of cool if you want to, or if you have to run Windows, but you need certain Linux applications at the same time. You don't want to open up a virtual machine. You could just go ahead and install a Linux kernel on Windows now. So, I mean, that's cool, I guess. You can't go wrong with that. But it's at this point that I I don't have any more bookmarks. But with that, what we're going to do is talk about hardware, and probably the most impressive hardware thing that has been announced was the Steam Deck. The Steam Deck is a handheld gaming device that is made by Valve. See? Valve. And you can run, it runs Arch Linux, supposedly. Arch Linux with a heavily modified version of KDE Plasma. And with this, the hardware and all that is really cool, but the thing that's going to make this really important, and that already has to a significant degree, is more game compatibility with Linux, because there's a lot of people who've already purchased this. If I tried to purchase this right now, I probably wouldn't get the thing until 2024. But it seems like a really nice device, and like I said, with that, there's already been a lot of different shifts and additions that's changed. One of the most notable things is the Epic Game Store, I believe, works on Linux, and there's been not the Game Store, their anti-cheat software now is really easy to enable on Linux systems, and we've been seeing a lot of games work a lot better with Proton because of that. This thing, I didn't order one. I wish I would have, but this was actually supposed to be releasing and shipping out now, but because of what's going on currently in the world, national supply chain issues, things like that, people are not going to start getting their Steam Decks until probably the end of first quarter. So expected order availability second quarter of 2022 for all devices. So yeah, near the end of first, probably around second, and I hope it doesn't change going further from there, because it is going to be super cool to see how these things work in actual hands-on reviews with them. With that, Pizza Loving Nerd reminded me of the PinePhone Pro. PinePhone Pro. I have a PinePhone. I'm going to show you guys real quick. This right here is my PinePhone. I have it on a little thing that's kind of cool. It's it's a stabilizer for shots, but I have the PinePhone on it just because it looks kind of cool. This is the Debian one. I got this earlier in the year, and it's a fun little tinkering toy. And it's not really too usable as a daily driver cell phone, but hopefully that changes with the PinePhone Pro, which will increase the performance by a considerable sum. It's going to ship at $399. Here we can see what's inside. It will have 128 gigabytes of internal storage, 4 gigabytes of RAM. I personally think they could have gone a little bit more with this, especially at $400, but the whole point is kind of a Linux development device, because even with these specs, it's still gonna be a little hard to use as a daily driver. But it does have a better processor, which is nice, because this thing is usable, but nothing really runs super smooth. Even though I did kind of show in one video me using the current PinePhone as a I put Jellyfin on it and was able to stream 4K movies from it. Basically server things. I put Minecraft on it and was barely able to use it as that. And it worked as a wonderful Nextcloud server, which was cool. Little cell phone as a Nextcloud server. It has Gorilla Glass 4, hexa-core processor at 1.5 gigahertz. Got the video here where you can see their little trailer. Availability, they're supposed to start shipping or pre-order for developers on October. So some people already have it in their hands, and early adapters will be able to get the Explorer Edition units early in 2022. So hopefully I get one of these Explorer Editions and you see a video of this on my channel. If you're not already subscribed, make sure you're subscribed because I have a lot of cool hardware stuff coming up. And speaking of cool hardware stuff, I have the JingPad. I have the JingPad A1 at my disposal. It was really cool because I was one of the very few channels, I think there was like 3 or 4 of us, that got the earlier developer models of this, and that's where that came from, the video on this that I already have on the channel. But I have the A1, which is the official device, and this thing's super cool. Like, it's built well, it performs very well, and especially using something like the PinePhone and then opening up a JingPad and using that, it's really good. I still have to do my review on it. I have the pin here, which is one of the things I was really looking forward to. This is the little JingPad pencil that it works really good. It has a pressure sensitive pointer here, so for drawing and painting, it works pretty good. There's some little things that I'm hoping are worked out before my review so I don't have to complain about them. One of them is like selecting text, copying and pasting using the touch interface isn't really, that doesn't really work at all yet. Or at least last time I tried it out, which was about a week ago or so. So I'm hoping they do fix that fairly soon. It's a good device. It has a beautiful display. It's a 2K display, so 1440p at 266 ppi. This is shipping now, so a lot of people who've ordered this through their, what was it, Indiegogo, I believe, have already gotten them, which is nice when an Indiegogo campaign is actually successful. Happy New Year to you. JingPad is good. Fedora versus Arch. That is one of the hardest decisions that I would make because I love both Fedora and Arch almost equally. If a Fedora worked for everything that I would need it to work for, so if there was like, basically if Fedora had AMD Pro drivers, just easy to get, I would probably be on Fedora right now. Otherwise, I'm on Arch because they have the AUR and I could get the Pro drivers through there. This is the pin. The battery's pretty good. On the earlier model, the battery kind of sucked, but I am noticing an improvement with the A1 model. TechHut, do you think Clear Linux is well optimized and a good start for a new project, or just Beta OS that needs more development, not stable? As a desktop, Clear Linux is not the best thing in the world, but as a server operating system, Clear Linux and how everything works, how the update structure works, how they bundle various application suites, that is probably good and probably the best purpose. At the moment, I would not recommend Clear OS as a desktop Linux distribution. Pro cameras, you've seen it. The cameras on the JingPad are very good. 60 megapixel main camera. I have a picture on my Twitter of my dog that was taken with the JingPad, and it's very good. How does the JingPad compare to something such as the Microsoft Surface Pro? Well, the Microsoft Surface Pro is probably better, but the JingPad is Linux, and if you are a fan of Linux, it's definitely worth having. It's wonderful. Has a great keyboard, and pretty soon you're going to be able to start flashing different Linux distributions to that, because right now they runs GNOME OS, which is good. But I would prefer to have even like Ubuntu, something like that on it. That is what I am excited for. Or Pop! OS on the JingPad would be fantastic. I would really love that. Pretty good mic that has stereo speakers and dual microphone, which is pretty cool. It is wireless, has wireless connectivity options, so you can put a SIM card in it and have data anywhere you go. and other stuff and things. You could, of course, use a terminal. It's Linux, so anything you'd be able to do on Linux, you could do on this. Their App Store does not have very many applications in it at the moment, but it has the Ubuntu base, so anything that is available on a Ubuntu ARM processor, you can go ahead and use. Bro, are you into hacking? Not really. Oh, it's Deca. Hello. Don't recommend Arch in any forms. At least to new users, at least. At least a base Arch install. And trying to get somebody just to install Arch probably isn't a good idea, but you got to know at least a little bit of what's going on and be willing to kind of tinker with things to use Arch. If you're willing to work with the terminal and do things like that, Arch is wonderful. But I prefer Fedora, ultimately. All right, so as far as hardware, there's been other laptops that have been released, but for me anyways, those are the three main things that stand out. The PinePhone by Pine64, the JingPad by, I think they have a funny name, it's a Jingling. This device is super cool, and the Steam Deck. So for me, those are the most important and biggest things that has happened to Linux in 2021. Obviously, there have been a ton of Linux distributions that have been released. I talked about the ones that were most important to me, which was Debian, Zorin, and I believe Elementary OS, which wasn't important to me but worth mention. 2022 is going to have some cool ones. Dominique's in here. I've seen a lot of mock-ups of things, and I'm really excited for what's going to be happening with Flutter and OS going forward. I would recommend you all check out that project. So with that, what we're going to... another thing that's happening next year is I believe the next LTS of Ubuntu is coming out. Ubuntu Update Structure. Which it's always a big deal when an LTS version of Ubuntu comes out. Stable release updates. I think this is it. There's a nice little graph somewhere. No, this isn't it. But I'm pretty sure the next Ubuntu release comes out this next year. Which is next. Well, the next long-term support release. Is this it? Somewhere there's a cool little graph. I'm not going to be able to find it right now. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and start focusing on the chat, talking to you guys. And yeah, this is going to be nearing the end of the stream, because that's what was most important to me. If there was anything that was important to you guys that's worth mention, let me know, and we will talk about it, and we'll look it up. Yes, Zorin is very pretty. Oh, I was wondering why the screen went so dark. There we go. This is a super cool laptop, by the way. And we were talking about Fedora versus Arch, and this has a NVIDIA GPU in it. And just because of that, I'm going to go ahead and put Fedora on it. Really excited for that. So, let's see what chat has to say. Well, let's go ahead and switch to... Here we are. Scene. Hello, everybody. Let's see. All right, I'm talking to you guys now. Let's see. Switched to Linux from Windows in 2021. Followed your videos. Much help. Thank you. You are so welcome. I love that. What's your favorite old version of Windows? I used... My first version of Windows I ever used was 98. I was born in 96, and I got my first computer I was probably 3 when I started playing around on a computer. Remember, I used to play a game called Mr. Bones, and you could like drag things around. So Windows 98 is my first experience with Windows. I used Windows Me a lot because it was on my grandmother's computer, and she had a lot of cool games that she got at like 7-Eleven. Do you have any recommendations for a server distro? Generally, I use the LTS version of Ubuntu, but actually last night I tried out Fedora server. That's something we could do real quick. Here, let's go over here. Boop, bop. Doo-doo-doo, boop. I've been using Fedora server since last night, and it's really cool. So if I go over to my Proxmox instance, I threw Ubuntu, or I threw Fedora server in Proxmox. So this right here is my Proxmox instance. And over here, you can see we have Fedora server running. If I go ahead and go over here, it is 94 port 9090. So let's go 94 port 9090, just like that. And the one cool thing that stood out to me with the Fedora server edition is they actually ship with a GUI. So that was cool. Pizza Loving Nerd asks, 7-Eleven games, question mark. Yeah, 7-Eleven used to sell like really cheap computer game discs in like the early 2000s. And my grandma would buy those all the time. And it was pretty cool games. Really like cheap games, but it was fun. And this, I think I picked Brandon. So Fedora server ships with a GUI, which is nice. Turn on admin access. And it allows you to see some of the network stuff, allows you to see your storage and all that. I know you can do all this through CLI, but the fact that this just is default is really cool. What's the yacht? Yacht port. I installed yacht on it. My last video was on yacht, and it was pretty fun. Yacht port, not yacht port. That's the one problem with these names. Docker. All right. I'm reading chat real quick. Your videos are very informed, making it better. Finally switch full-time to Manjaro KDE. Manjaro KDE is awesome. That's one of the first ones I was using. Rewind 2021 win. I was going to do a full dedicated video, but this is basically my rewind because both of the Linux Experiment and Pizza Loving Nerd have fantastic rewinds out there. So I'd recommend you check out those videos. If you had to, what window tiling manager would you use? I would probably use i3 because I'm a noob and I can understand that config. Let's see. Can you make a video on how to build tools from source code, please? That is above my skill set. Let's see. Arco Linux or Endeavor. Personally, I'd pick Endeavor. Yeah. So what I was going to show you guys real quick is port 8000. So if I switch this to port 8000, this, oh no, I think I need to go without the S. There we go. Oh, what's the default? Yacht default, yacht setup, Docker. I'm still getting all this set up. I made a video the other night of setting all this up on the node, but I'm still trying to get this up and working properly on my local machine. Where's their install guides? Let's see, install documentation, because I'm just using the default stuff. Let's see, there it is. Admin. Boop. Yacht is really cool if you're looking to start getting into and learning Docker. You can see I have a code server running, Homer. And if I go over to applications, I can go to this code server, for example, open up the web UI, and then have VS Code on a web browser on my local machine. So pretty cool. I recommend you check out the last video I uploaded. Not many people have watched it, but it's doing okay. Is Pop better than Fedora? In my personal opinion, no, but that is a personal opinion. Hi Tekka, not sure if you see my question. I do. Sorry if for repeat it. Which Linux distribution do you recommend? Arch, GUI, GNOME, Endeavor OS. Wait, what? Would you recommend? Oh, Arch, Linux, GUI, GNOME, Endeavor OS. It depends on your use case and what you need. If everything that you need is in Fedora, just use that. Otherwise, if you need things from the AUR, Arch is your move. Fedora server performance compared to Ubuntu LTS. I don't know yet, but that's something that I'm going to be deeply looking into. I just installed the Fedora, and I think the resource consumption on Fedora by default is a little bit higher, but they have some more services running by default, but that doesn't really mean too much. Yeah, this has been my rewind. If you guys have any other questions or any other events that has happened this year, please let us know in chat. Otherwise, we're going to wrap it up here, and we're going to make a video on my current desktop because somebody requested that I do that. If you guys are curious to what I'm running here, there you go. And we're going to I'm going to do a video on the installation for this theme, which is the Graphite. Yeah, Graphite Light. It's a very good theme. I'd highly recommend it. Hello, I use R2. Good night, fun stream. Ultimately, when all said is done, I absolutely hope that you all have a wonderful new year. Big thank you to everybody for subscribing to this channel, watching these videos, supporting my content. It has been a fantastic year. I think we had started the year with like 25,000 subscribers, which by no means is a small number. That alone is fantastic. And we're at like 82, 83 now. So we've had a lot of people join this community, a lot of people supporting the videos and the content, and I cannot begin to describe how much I appreciate that. And I hope next year is just as good. I hope we bring more people in. We get a lot of people switching to Linux, or at least learning about it, taking a look at it. Yeah, it's been a good year, and I do appreciate every single one of you. With that, we're going to end the stream. We have one more video coming up, which will be just going over the desktop that I have right now on GNOME. I hope you guys enjoy it. It'll be the last video of the year, and then we are going to start again. We're going to be learning some things when it comes to content to expect in the new year. Of course, we're going to do the normal stuff. We're going to be looking at Linux distributions. We're going to do software highlights for cool apps that I happen to stumble across. But you will probably be seeing more hardware reviews, which I'm really excited for. Yeah, and a lot more server stuff. I love playing around with servers, server software, Docker, things like that. So you will be seeing a little bit more of that than last year, but definitely not just blown out of proportion. With that, the stream is ending. Happy New Year. I hope you all had a wonderful Christmas. And yeah, thank you all so much. And I look forward to the new year. See you.